Hi! What's the best way to improve your English speaking skills? This is Susan Broder from Speak Languages and Travel the World, here to help you improve your English with minimum effort and maximum benefit. Today I'd like to teach you how to improve your English speaking skills and any language if it comes to that. Now, I have quite a bit of experience in this since I'm passionate about learning languages, and I started encouraging people to learn languages already more than 40 years ago, because when I was 17 and my mother was operated on her throat, I substituted her, and the school was so enthusiastic that they employed me the subsequent year to work alongside my mother. So I have quite a lot of experience in this. And when I was already 34 years old, I decided to learn Spanish as I needed it. And the method I implemented was so successful that I could, within a couple of months, speak to authorities on the telephone without any great problems. So I did have the advantage that it's a Romance language, and I already knew Italian, so that's slightly similar. However, it was definitely not that easy. So what's the secret to this method? Well, all of my most successful students have various ingredients in common, and I'll tell you a few stories about them later. But what is the most common ingredient is that they don't wait for the teacher to teach them. Rather, they wait for the teacher to motivate them and guide them, and they teach themselves. So they all have self-motivation, regular learning habits, and they enjoy having fun with the language. These are the three most fundamental things. And they love reading, they love music, and they love transcribing the lyrics. They love watching endless YouTube videos, and generally they enjoy the language, and therefore they try and surround themselves with the language. So there is no correct way to learn. Everyone has to find their own way. Some like writing, some like listening, some like singing, some like reading. The important thing is that you find a regular daily habit, and personally I find the easiest is to wake up 30 minutes earlier than you need to for your daily life, and dedicate these first 30 minutes to what I would call serious studying, and then depending on what you've studied during the day, then use what we call dead time for consolidating this, which would mean commuting time or any free moments you have during the day to revise a flashcard or anything that you want to repeat. Now, when babies learn a language, first of all, they listen. Subsequently, they speak. When they go to school, they learn to read, and the last thing they learn to do is to write. So this is in stark contrast with the traditional way of learning a language, where people learn to read, write, and grammar before they ever really learn to speak. And this is unnatural. So I would recommend that the first thing you do is immerse yourself in the language, surround yourself in the language by setting your social media, your computer, your phone, all into the English language or the language that you're learning. And then try and think in the language as much as possible. So listening is fundamental, as I said, because it gives you, as well as reading, the grammatical structures, the expressions, the phrasal verbs, the idioms that you need to sound natural in a language. So if you're watching films, for example, you could slow them down, you could stop them, and you could repeat certain phrases. You could try and record yourself repeating these phrases as well, so as to gain some natural language. You can also write some chunks of language. Chunks meaning not vocabulary, but vocabulary in a context. So you learn the prepositions and the grammatical structure together with the vocabulary that you're interested in learning. This is really important for learning natural language, and then you'll automatically be able to also think in the language if you're learning chunks. Now, you can also listen in the car whilst commuting. I had an experience when I was learning Spanish. I would put the old cassettes in the car and would refuse to change cassette until I'd understood and been able to repeat the first one. But it got to a point where there was a sentence I just did not understand, and I gave up. I let it just run through until one day I wasn't even listening to it, but it was just playing, when suddenly I had what we call an aha moment, and I understood it because my subconscious had been working on it, and suddenly I understood it because I had opened my mind, let it free. I was thinking of something totally different. I hadn't worried about it. I hadn't insisted on it. And all of a sudden, it made sense to me, and it was such a satisfaction, such a joyful moment for me. So even if you're not particularly listening to these CDs in the car, as long as they're always repeating themselves, your subconscious is actually picking up the language and the grammatical structures and the vocabulary, and it'll come out in due time. You just have to give yourself time. Now, you need to expose yourself also to the news. The news is quite easy because you already know it in your own language, so it'll be easier to understand. And music, YouTube videos, all kinds of exposure, so that you can pick up the grammatical structures, the verb patterns, learn the language as naturally as possible. The old way was learning grammar first. Now, that's really, not the way we speak. We don't think of grammar as we're speaking, even though I do think it's important to subsequently learn the grammar, so that when you're learning a language you can understand the why of certain things, but not as a first step. It's for going more into depth in the language. So another important thing is to remember to practice your interrogatives, because it's very easy to answer questions. It's not so easy to ask questions. So when you're learning a language, pay attention to how other people ask questions and try and learn these question formats and also natural answers to questions, so that you're able to intervene when you're speaking to someone, when you're having a conversation, so that you're showing interest, and when you're showing interest, the conversation will flow more naturally. So that's just as important as being able to answer questions. Now, speaking can only be practiced by speaking. So you should speak all the time. Speak to yourself. It doesn't matter if you don't have a speaking partner. Actually, you'll probably feel more comfortable speaking to yourself because no one can laugh at you. You won't feel intimidated. So you should speak to yourself in the shower, speak to yourself in the car, speak whilst you're cooking, speak whilst you're getting dressed. Speak anytime you're free. And then when you'll have a partner to speak to, you'll feel that much more confident. It's also a question of mechanics of the mouth. Every language has a different way of pronouncing things. So it's very important that your mouth becomes used to pronouncing the language you're studying. And it's also important for the mechanics to practice. Then a very useful way of practicing your speaking is to listen to a short story and then try and summarize it and say it in your own words. You can say it various times until you feel comfortable, after which I would take the phone and record. You could record yourself, and once you've recorded yourself, maybe record yourself a second time and see if you can improve on it. This all gives you more fluency and more confidence in your speaking. And that will help you then when you want to try thinking in English rather than translating. Translating is, in my opinion, not useful because you're using structures in a different way. Every language has its own way of expressing things, so it doesn't make much sense to translate from one language to the other. It's better to bring it out naturally. You've heard it in a video, you've heard it on the news, and that's the way you should repeat it. That's the way you should say it without thinking of a translation. You should also be very curious. You're supposed to have fun with the language. That's the nicest way of learning a foreign language, having fun with it. So be curious, explore YouTube videos, anything that you're interested in, and try and understand them with subtitles in English so that you can, be interested in something and learn from what you're interested in. Now, some of my most successful students include two 13-year-old twins, sisters who just love English, and they started singing and translating song lyrics and practicing their speaking with singing. And they decided that when their parents weren't at home, they would speak to each other in English. So they reached an amazing level of competence, and I was really surprised because they had never been outside their own country, and yet their English was a really high level. Other students of mine have also ranged from primary school students to high school students, and the common denominator was that they watched a lot of videos, they listened to a lot of music, and they were having fun with the language. So they took learning into their own hands, and that was the most important thing for their success. Finally, there's a student of mine, Gianni, who is a doctor, and he commutes 30 minutes each way to work. And he experimented my fast fluency trainer and followed my coaching tips on how to improve his speaking, because he needs to speak and present at international conferences, and felt very uneasy expressing himself, and also worried that he wouldn't be able to understand his colleagues when they asked him questions at the end of the conference. And after having implemented everything, he discovered that he was much more confident. He came back elated because he had been able to answer the colleagues' questions without any trouble, and so he felt that he'd really gained a lot from implementing these tips and my fast fluency trainer. So I definitely recommend that you take your learning into your own hands, 30 minutes a day, or even less if you don't have time, but regularly. Regularly is the most important thing. Having fun is very important. Paying attention to what you read, listen and watch, and use, I'll put it in the description below the links, use Anki or Quizlet or other apps for flashcards, which are very useful if they're digital flashcards, because you can have them on your phone with you whenever you like to revise. There is VoScreen, with which you can experiment 5 seconds of listening, which you can then try repeating, and it's very natural language from films. And there are TV series you can watch, slow down and repeat on Ororo TV, which is nice because you can also see the subtitles, slow the speed down, and so watch something that you may watch normally in your own language, you can watch it in English. Okay, so I'm sure these tips will help you. I'm confident that if you follow these, you'll be able to improve your speaking very quickly. and I look forward to reading your comments. So please write if you have any other ideas, and also what your experience is in learning to speak. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye.